My name is Dr. Garrett Hallweg. I've spent my career as a psychiatrist helping others discover the truth about our reality. This provocative time cover asked, "Is truth dead?" Time suggests truth is relative, it is subjective. One person's truth isn't true for another. Take, for instance, morality. In India, cows are sacred and should not be eaten. In America, eating cows as beef is common. On the surface, morality seems subjective. The right thing to do is up to the individual. Whatever each individual thinks is okay is okay. However, when you ask Hindus, they would say they don't eat cows because they are reincarnated ancestors. Well, if we believed the cow in the pasture was actually Grandma Doris reincarnated, we wouldn't eat beef either. So the truth we believe matters. And we arrive at our truths from our experience, observations, and logic. Patients rely on my experience and wisdom to give them advice for their lives. Do I rely on my own subjective ideas of what I think is right or wrong? Or do I rely on objective, discoverable truths to guide my patients? I would never advise a patient to eat their ancestor. This is a universal objective truth. It goes beyond my personal ideas about eating meat. We may not like the impact of these universal moral truths, so we argue, well, we can determine what is right and wrong for ourselves. This line of reasoning says, I don't have to rely on a standard beyond myself to determine right and wrong. I can do whatever I want as long as it doesn't hurt anyone. Well, one common example I hear along this line is pornography is okay. It doesn't really hurt anyone. When I ask this person if their daughter was the one being filmed, would they feel differently? This quickly changes their mind to thinking pornography is objectively, morally wrong. In this series, we have learned that our ideas can have real consequences. Just like viewing pornography can produce bad marriages, our experience tells us the world is broken. When you look around, you will find hurtful relationships, divorce, suffering, injustice, broken homes. But we spend most of our time, sadly, avoiding this truth of brokenness through things like entertainment, video games, Facebook, possessions and things, relationships, hookups, occupation and school, being busy, or parenting, even escaping reality through alcohol and drugs. Our topic tonight is morality. How should we live? Do we live to do whatever we want, whatever we think is right or wrong, or are there universal moral laws we should discover, learn, and live by? Our discussion so far in this series has shown there is sufficient evidence to suggest a purposeful creator. A purposeful creator has a purpose and plan for you. The best way to live your life. Tonight we will discuss the truth about the existence of universal moral laws, showing us the best way to live and ultimately pointing to a universal law giver. When we talk about a way we should live, our modern culture is offended. Don't tell me how to live because that limits my freedom. Well, but is this the reality about freedom, that freedom exists without any limits? In one sense, you're free to eat whatever you want. Your body, however, is not free from the consequences due to the natural order of physiology. Our universal moral truths exist to help us from unintended consequences. So living by these universal moral truths prevent us from the unintended potential harm of going against them. Many argue they can watch pornography because pornography does not cause anyone harm. So, is there a universal moral truth not to lust after women? I certainly have seen far reaching unintended consequences of pornography on people's marriages, people's productivity or creativity, on people's sexuality, including erectile dysfunction in otherwise healthy 26-year-old men. Living in alignment with universal moral truths does not oppress our freedom. Instead, it frees us from experiencing unintended consequences of violating the design of how we should live. But even more importantly, it provides us freedom from the guilt of wrong living. So, if we all live by these universal moral truths, there are no bad relationships and no reason to feel guilty. But the truth is, we don't always make the right choices. In doing so, we let ourselves or others down, our families, our communities, which shapes and influences our culture because people begin to think, if someone steals from me, then I should steal from them, or I can just fudge on my taxes, everyone does it. We act differently than how we know we should. A diabetic knows they shouldn't eat a cupcake, but they do it anyway. Their blood sugar spikes and causes disease. We all know this feeling, guilt. We could try to explain this away as a cultural indoctrination like Catholic guilt, Jewish guilt, but I have seen a universal attempt of all people to erase their past, to rid themselves of their feelings of guilt, and from things they have done wrong in their past. In fact, dealing with the feelings of guilt is what all religions have in common. They all try to deal with the feelings of guilt that come from violating our design, violating God's desire for us, missing the mark with the ensuing injustice, suffering, and death of our relationships, families, and communities. All religion is man's attempt to make things right with others, with God, or the universe. In Hinduism, followers try to work out karma to obtain cosmic law and order. In Judaism, this work is accomplished by following the laws of the Torah and the Talmud. In Buddhism, a right relationship with the universe is achieved by working out dharma, the right way of living, and following four noble truths to achieve nirvana, liberation from reincarnation. In Islam, Muslims work to earn favor with Allah through the 5 pillars of Islam. And even religious legalistic Christians believe they earn their way into heaven by doing good works, or at least doing more good than bad. Where all religions differ from Christianity is God Himself makes us right because we cannot live by the universal moral laws. God came on a rescue mission to earth, walked among us, and recruited us into His rescue mission to restore Earth, starting here and now with you. Which kind of makes sense because if we hurt someone and we want to make it right with them, we ask them what we could do to make it right. Jesus comes along and says, even though you made it wrong and you can't get it right, I will make it right with God. I will mend a broken relationship. The fact that everyone already knows right and wrong is a much simpler concept than even religion. Even a child knows universal moral laws. So they come pre-programmed with a knowledge of when people treat them wrong. When someone cuts in line in front of them, children know their rights are violated. They say, that's not fair. Children may have selfish impulses, but they also have the capacity to understand when their rights are violated. When considering how we should live, we have to admit there is a discoverable objective truth of how to treat others. We have seen this cannot come from a random, unguided process. We all possess this truth, independent of age, culture, or religion. Perhaps we were created with the ability to determine these truths by a creator whose nature ordered the universe this way. Some argue we don't need God as a moral law giver. They would say we are the end result of random mutations from a primitive ancestor, and we got here by an unguided process going in no particular direction. However, if this were true, then we are no more culpable for killing than a cat is for killing a mouse. It is apparent there is a purpose in our way of life, in our way to live. Admitting such a purpose leads us to a moral law giver and compels us to follow the universal moral truths. So where do these universal moral truths come from? We've learned in our previous discussions that a big bang requires a big banger. Could it be that universal moral truths require a purposeful creator, a moral law giver? Perhaps by understanding these moral truths, we understand the nature of God. Let's see how this goes. Well, we all agree murder is wrong, or torturing babies. Where folks might disagree is an issue like abortion. Everyone agrees it is not right to torture or kill babies. The disagreement is about if an unborn child is truly a human. But when all the political debating is over, and I sit with a woman who made a choice to end her pregnancy, she talks about her abortion with words like regret, sorrow, shame, and guilt. Let's look at even more subtle differences. From a previous talk, we learned all have inherent knowledge of preferred character, our preferred self. We all prefer someone who is charitable over someone who is greedy. But we do not think or act charitable all the time. At times, we all act greedy. Now we have a litmus test, a gold standard to determine if God is God. He should match up with these universal moral truths, and by comparison, how much we don't match up to this character. Because of limited time, I will leave you to explore this. Here's a list of these preferred characteristics that are universal and characteristics that we don't so much prefer. But I will say when Jesus defined how we should live by saying, everyone knows murder is wrong, but what will really change this world is if you remove anger from your heart. Everyone knows adultery is wrong, but what would really restore the world is if you removed lust from your mind. And most radically, if someone hates you or does something wrong to you, the only way to make things right in this world is to forgive them. Show your enemy love. Eliminate your thoughts of ill will or your behaviors of revenge. Charlie Roberts wandered into an Amish school one day and shot 10 girls, ages 6 to 13. One girl stood up and asked the shooter to kill her and let the others go. The Amish community responded to this heinous act with forgiveness. They publicly acknowledged their sympathy for Mr. Roberts' family and even took up a collection to help Charlie's family grieve in the midst of their grief. But why should we choose to live by these universal moral truths? We already discussed how we know inherently when we violate universal moral truths because we feel guilty. Following this way of living also fits with what we know is the right way to live. If God exists, Couldn't God just force us to live by these universal truths? But that would be not a loving, personal, voluntary mutual relationship. Forcing us to live by the universal moral truths would be oppression. Some argue we should choose to follow the universal moral truths because they are in our collective best interest. However, if you remove God as the universal moral law provider and insert man's ideas of the collective best interest, you can end up with regimes of terror. If we are just the lucky end result of random mutations of a primitive ancestor and we are evolving a sense of right and wrong, we end up just like Easter Island. The collective best interest was to create these statues and to roll them into place by cutting down trees until the habitat could no longer support life. If the way we should live is only about what we as men and women define as the collective best interest, and then there is no ultimate meaning or lawgiver we should submit to, then eventually the sun will burn out, the earth will grow cold, and it really does not matter how we live as long as we never get caught. A universal law requires a universal lawgiver. But it seems God is backed into a corner, maybe on a ledge, needing rescue, right? Because if God were an ultimate lawgiver and judge, he would have to be all-knowing, beyond rebuttals or mistakes. If God, God would have to be a loving personal God to preserve our ability to choose to follow this universal moral truths. God would also have to be all-powerful in order to right the wrongs, to undo the injustices, to bring about restoration and put the world right. If God is all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-loving, why would God allow evil to persist? Wouldn't God rid the world of evil if he loved us? Oh, wait, he did. The Christian narrative is God writing himself into the story to redeem his creation. This unique case of Christianity is that God loved us enough to humble himself and become what we are, full of wrongdoing and guilty feelings, so we could become what he is, acceptable in character before God. So we can receive his love, which sparks a desire to live by his universal moral truths, and we spread this love to others. He shows us he is loving. He shows us, he proves to the world that he is powerful, and he demonstrates that he knows everything. He knows all about us. If we voluntarily accept this way, his way, and accept that he is the ultimate lawgiver, the arbiter of justice, of the universal moral law, then we trust that Jesus will put all things right in the universe. We can enjoy a right relationship with God and others now, in this world, by following this universal moral truth. Along comes a man, an ancient teacher from an obscure place called Nazareth, and says, "You know that feeling of guilt and separation you have? I can take it away." Yes, I want that because despite all my efforts, I can't ever get it right. I want to do what is right, but I still don't do it. And he says, "It's okay. I will make it right." "But how will I know you will make it right?" He says, "You will have to trust me. You will have to trust I will put an end to all injustices, suffering, and evil in this world. That is amazing. What do I have to do? Just trust me. But how will you know I trust you? When you really trust me and believe what I say is true, you will know me and love me. And your love for me will compel you to love others. This love will drive you to help the poor, protect the innocent, help the widow, encourage the prisoner, and teach the child. We respond to His love and acceptance by doing His will, keeping His commandments, being in alignment with His universal moral truths. When truth tastes that good, you want to tell others about Him, like when you tell someone about your favorite cupcake shop. And as a bonus, you get to enjoy right now in this life all the blessings that come with right living. Living this way keeps you from unintended consequences of poor choices. I would summarize how we should live is to have a loving relationship with God, whereby every fiber of your being wants to please Him and love others the way you want to be loved. In learning about how we should live and morality, we discover more attributes of God as a provider and a giver of love. God's love compels us to love others, even when they oppose or harm us. Tune in next time when we will talk about our destiny, where we are going. Thank you for listening. I'm Dr. Garrett Hallweg.